What's up, y'all? I thought I would continue my enormously unpopular series, The Poets I've Been Reading. I got 3 books for you today I want to talk about. These first 2 poets I learned about as I was doing a deep dive on modern poet Darren C. Demery. Darren C. Demery has like 23 books of poetry out, and I've written several reviews of his work. He's an Ohio poet, and I've also watched some interviews about Darren C. Demery. And he said in an interview that 2 of his biggest influences were Samuel Menashe and Aase Berg. So, poetry doesn't come to you. You have to go to it. And so I ordered these books. I guess I'm a privileged cat. I'd be buying some books all the time. And the first poet, I'd never heard of this guy, Samuel Menashe. Now, Menashe was born in New York City in the 1920s, 1925, and his jam is very short poetry. Just really, really short. Lots of white space. I tell you what, I love all this white space. You want to make me happy? Give me some no poetry. Give me some absence of poetry. I know that sounds crazy to say, but I like these little ones. One of his most famous poems, Samuel Menashe, is this little one. It says, "Pity us by the sea on the sands so briefly. Pity us on the sea on the sands so briefly." And that just has to do with the impermanence of life. And I was telling a student today that a lot of poetry has that cooking underneath the surface. You don't have to scratch poetry that hard to get this idea, oh snap, we're going to die at some point. It's just in there. It's just embedded in a lot of poetry. But you want to hear another Samuel Menashe poem? Now, one thing I do like about this guy is when he takes 2 little pieces and puts them on separate pages, but they don't have separate titles. So, for example, most of this book has like a little poem title, little poem. But there's a dozen moments in this book where it doesn't do that. It'll be Norway, like this example says Norway up here, and it's a little poem. And then this is part 2 of the poem. What a normal poet would do is just make a 2-stanza poem. That'd be trad poetics right there. But what this guy does is he's like, no, I'm going to give you a full page to think about. All this white space. I get down here and I'm like, white space and woo, and then I'm over here, and now I'm left to compare these 2 in some unique way. So those were actually my favorite moments. I'm going to read one of these 2-pagers, and this one's called Norway. The way her blonde hair hangs over the back of the chair reminds me of Norway, where hay is racked to hang that way, straight down, on narrow fields flat as a board, lapped between steep mountains and deep fjords. I left my seed in a grove so deep the sun does not reach through the trees. Now I am wed to the wood and lord of all leaves, and I can give the green blessing to whom I please. Every line in that second poem was end-rhymed. Deep, trees, leaves, please. So a lot of rhyme in Samuel Menashe, one of his strengths, a lot of rhyme. Hey, moving on, y'all. So the other poet that was inspirational to Darren C. Demery, which is the poet I learned about this poet from, is Aase Berg. This is a female poet living in Sweden, and she was quite the buzz probably 20 years ago or something. What this is her first selected poems from her first 4 books. It was translated by an old boy out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Roll Tide, people. Roll Tide. Who translated this? Johannes Goransson. But Aase Berg, B-E-R-G, is the poet here. Wow. This was some really far out experimental stuff. Really experimental stuff. What does Aase Berg do well? Definitely good at repetition. Not repeating twice like Sylvia Plath might, but repeating 3 times, which is unique in the poetry game, to hit something 3 times instead of just 2. Lots of shorter poems in here. Honestly, I like the first couple poems in this book the best out of this whole thing. So maybe like right when she burst on the scene is when I found her writing most exciting. But that isn't to say that I didn't find some like cool lines. Like I underline lines that I like, well, because they give me pleasure and I want to like feel what it is to put my pencil under them. But also maybe one day I want to write a centos or a patchwork poem or a found poem. And now I've got all these little lines that I could borrow. But here's one of the little lines I liked. The laugh maps, wild strawberry patch. That word laugh map, I don't think that's a word, could be wrong there, but the poet has it as one word, or I guess I should say the translator, but laugh maps, one word. So that's another cool thing. Besides the repetition of words 3 times, this poet also invents language by slamming 2 words together. You know what? Here's a poem I like. This is one of the later ones. I'll read this one to you. So Ouroboros. Do y'all know what the Ouroboros is? A poet taught me this. A poet taught me what this is. That's that snake, I think, that'd be eating its tail. It's just perpetually eating its tail. So here we go. Ouroboros. Ache out of chew up. Wake time's tooth. Wave clumped corallic. Sting viper. Muck hand. Aguhalk viper. The gape of a yawning. Viper biters, poison sting has no bite. Swaddle snake sloughs off some of a teething ring. No sewage, but small stings in sunglass eye, nothing. Sees hummingbird drunken in bunkin. 4 walls everywhere. The wall clock ticks oxygen. Never again will it get cold. My little muffle bun, glass wool bale, insulation blanket, in the hearth of fire, some home knitted soft, the woolering warmth in beard stubble, chop, block, wool sweater lint, lives the moth. You know, you might wonder, Staley, how you even getting pleasure out of that, bro? What are you making out of that? How is that giving you pleasure? I don't know, man. Compared to the other poems, that one is giving me pleasure. You know, sometimes the poet that holds you underwater so long that as soon as you get just a little gasp of air, you're like, oh, I like this. You know, and I feel like maybe that's what's happening with this one, Ouroboros. She combines some words. For example, viper biters, she's making one word. Sting viper, one word. Muck hand. Well, do I need to look that up? Is that a word? I don't know, man, maybe. But again, why is this giving me pleasure? Is this not giving you pleasure? Listen again, chillins. Sees hummingbird drunken in bunkin. Hummingbird drunken in bunkin? You do like that, it turns out. You actually like that. All right, now my final book today, and the poets I've been reading, just feverishly reading this stuff. Ever since I put the bottle down in 2020, go figure, I got all this time to be reading poetry. So for Christmas, I asked for this book, and I paid $20 for it, which seems like a lot of money. That's also the price of Apple Pear, but seems like a lot of money to pay for a poetry book. Kenneth Rexroth, part of the San Francisco Renaissance. This is his book called The Dragon and the Unicorn. Came out in 1950. I was interested in Kenneth Rexroth as I'm interested in lots of San Francisco things, including the Grateful Dead. But I wanted to know, who were the poets running around before your Robert Hunters? Who were the poets, the San Francisco Renaissance poets? And this guy's name keeps on coming up. And I finally decided to check out one of his books and read it from start to finish. What is this book? It's a different poetry book. For one thing, it's one long poem. This is a book-length poem, and it's a travel log. It's a travel log about a trip this old boy took to Europe. He goes to Wales, he goes to France, he goes to Italy, several other places. He describes what he does in this book, and I'm just going to read from the introduction because he really says it right. He says, the general tone of my book is not far removed from that expressed by other American travelers abroad, notably Mark Twain. So he's got like a slightly Mark Twain vibe. And one thing he does in this book, besides the traveling stuff, He also has a bunch of philosophy. He's just also, it's pretty much like stanza of travel, stanza of philosophy. He'd be like, we ate this bread, we drank wine, we camped by a river, we had sex. And then it'll be like a bunch of abstract nouns and stuff. And then it'll get back into the travel thing. Hey, y'all, I'm the kind of reader, I like concrete nouns. I just like things I can experience with my senses. So, and I'm not a philosopher. So I'll say that some of those philosophy parts, they kind of went in one ear and out the other. I didn't get off on it that much. It was hard for me to relate to. I liked some of the travel stuff. In particular, I liked his time in France. It seemed really cool. I want to read a portion from when he's in France, so you can get the feel of what I was digging in this travel style parts. Dinner in a peasant auberge. Everybody inspects the velos. The velos are the bicycles they were riding. Okay, I'm probably saying that wrong. De Paris à Italie. Incroyable. Formidable grilled pork chops, fried potatoes, tomatoes, beans in vinegar, fresh cheese, pears, wine, and coffee, and the magnificent bread of Turin. Just looking at it, we weep for joy after the rancid papier-mâché turds they sell in Paris. We shake hands with everybody and pedal on down the river, wobbling, heavy with food. I be loving some rivers. And when he says we shake hands with everybody and pedal on down the river, wobbling, heavy with food, I think that's all right. I like that image. We camp on the lorry, the velos parked under a rose bush, the sleeping bags under acacias, and careen down the swift current. Impossible to stand, much less swim against it. 2 owls chatter in the trees as the twilight comes, lavender and orange over the white reaches of water and the whiter sandbars and the first starlight dribbling on the rushing river. Maybe this is when a garage band just plays a song that's just in a major key, just makes you feel all right, man. It's just not trying to ask 1,000 different questions that are complicated. It's just setting up some nice imagery. Then I'm down. Nobody can tell you what your topic is. Nobody can tell you what the right topic of creative writing is. That's just not what they ever tell you as a writer. You get to decide your topic. And so some topics you decide to write about are going to hit for some audiences, and some topics are not going to hit. And for me, like, he's riding a bike, he's camping, he's hanging out by rivers, he's looking at owls. Okay, he's eating pork chops, he's drinking coffee, he's eating pears. Yeah, okay. Now, one thing, his tone, and you got a little bit of his tone in here, he's a little bit of a crotchety dude. I don't think this guy would be the most fun dude to travel with. For example, you get a little taste. He's like, we weep for joy after the rancid papier-mâché turds they sell in Paris. So he's talking about the bread in Paris is like papier-mâché turds. I mean, on one hand, you can that's funny. It is funny. It is funny to call bread a papier-mâché turd. I'm going to steal that. But I guess that energy of being so it's through the whole book. He's very against the papacy, the Pope, and all that. He thinks that a lot of the European cathedrals are not pretty and are eyesores, which I kind of like, because I like the fact that this American guy is not going over there creaming his drawers every single time he sees some cathedral or some type of art that's supposed to be amazing. So I like that. However, just 100 pages of him sort of being like a negative Nancy, it gets to be exhausting. One more example of this negative Nancy jam I'm telling you about. On 116, he be negative Nancying. I like this line. Okay, so he's in Italy. By this point, I'm sort of getting tired of his trip. By Italy, I'm not feeling it much, to be honest. But he's saying all the Venetians have to do is put food on a stove to spoil it. I mean, that's not super cool. It's super fair. 145, one more example. Okay, dinner in one of the last good restaurants in America. Okay, so there's only one good restaurant left in America. So he does return from his trip in America, and some of the best poems, I think, are And though it is one big long book poem, but some of the best stanzas are near the end of this book once he's back in America. And why is that? Well, I am an American, and the things in America are familiar to me. One thing that he does a lot in Europe is he names everything. And he names everything with these words that are in a different language. And I think that's cool. I mean, poets are allowed to know the words of things. We are allowed to know what everything is called, and we want to know the names of everything. However, I think that like when you're just name dropping 1,000 big European words and words outside of English, and you never take into account that the audience has no damn idea what you're talking about, page after page, page after page, that's just not my jam. That doesn't mean that it might not be your jam. Maybe that is your jam. Again, this whole thing is very subjective, y'all. We're talking about tastes in poetry. So, hey, I've already rambled on too long. I hope you read some poetry, and I hope you buy some Apple Pear, the only scented poetry chapbook to ever been released in the Americas. I say the Americas because in 1610, there was a scented chapbook in Mongolia because they used some ox blood to dye the paper, but the smell was accidental.